Hello, and welcome to day 2 of a Christmas Carol-A-Thon here on Unsourced. And today we're going to be taking a look at one of the more recent, more modern, and a little bit wacky ones. I like to do that on this series. I like to do one traditional and one wacky one, and this is very much a wacky one, even if it doesn't seem to be trying to be, and that is the 2018 adaptation of A Christmas Carol, directed by David Ezat and starring Stuart Brennan, who co-wrote the film. And this is I don't want to say it's wacky, but it does try to market itself as being the Scottish Christmas Carol. That's the conceit that it's sort of surrounded itself with. Hopefully some Scottish listeners are, watching this and they've seen this. Let me know how accurate and how authentic this was. That said, that wouldn't be the main conceit I would have, marketed this version around. There is something else that is a lot more pervasive and a lot more interesting about this one. No offense, and that is that I would remark that this is the age flip Christmas Carol. As you can see, Stuart Brennan is a young man, and the character of Scrooge portrayed in this film is at most early to mid 30s, and so he's the young Scrooge, and everyone else's ages get flipped to accompany this and to sort of be relative to this, such as nephew Fred is now grandfather Fred, because if you had a character like nephew Fred, he would be too young, relatively. Scrooge with Bill Murray did something similar, where instead of having a very young child, nephew Fred, they just made him his brother, so that makes sense, right? But the most egregious part, and one that's going to be the most memorable thing for anyone watching the movie, is that Tiny Tim is a 45-year-old man, very, very middle-aged, with 3 kids. And I'm not quite sure why they did that. There was no need to have Tiny Tim be an old man or a very manly man. Because, and this is so shocking, because not even Scrooge did that. They still kept him a young child. I'm wondering the thought process of that. Now, it is still played very seriously, and I have to applaud the movie for that. It doesn't take any cheap shots, and I think the way that they implement an adult Tiny Tim is very, very well done. It's probably the most impactful part of the movie. It's just the shock of realizing that that's meant to be Tiny Tim, and not only is that meant to be Tiny Tim, but Bob Cratchit is Scrooge's assistant, who is a woman and is now Tiny Tim's wife. It's just so much strangeness that I don't know if the movie really makes any use of. It doesn't really help at all with some of the more awkward parts of the film. And the awkward parts, I have to say, are the production. Again, no disrespect to the creators on this. I do think overall the movie is fine, but I think visually there are some parts where it does come across as very threadbare. The establishing shots and a lot of the set design come off as being heavily using B-roll, and a lot of sets feel very empty, very superficial, and not very lived in. But then you have parts of this where a lot of domicile sets, a lot of the office sets, a lot of the exterior sets, it really does seem like they had it for a day rental. And, that's a shame. Again, I'm not quite sure if this makes it feel very Scottish. It does seem to want to have a national identity sort of linked to this film. But it's hard to really get that gravity of, oh yeah, this is Scottish. Other than that, one last thing, really, because it's very standard adaptation, doesn't really make any hard choices with being, set in modern day. You could have translocated this as a period piece and nothing would change really with how it presents itself. But one thing that really stood out to me is Scrooge's, fiance, his ex-girlfriend. They really do her a massive disservice in here, and I'm not quite sure why again. Okay, so they decide to, because there's no nephew Fred, they don't really, Scrooge's sister to have the same, role that she did, where she dies tragically, and it makes Scrooge even more bitter. Because you don't need nephew Fred there, they don't really go that route. Instead, they combine her with Scrooge's sister, where they give her the scene where she tells off Scrooge for being, miserly and cold-hearted and very selfish, and then have her die in Scrooge's sister's place, which is very awkward because in the novel and a lot of other adaptations, that follow suit, she, just moves on without Scrooge, and it becomes an example of the life he could have had if he had grown as a person and not lost her. And so it just feels very mean-spirited. And then it commits another weird choice, because what it does is that it gives Scrooge a secondary love interest because, he's young, so there's, you don't want it to leave off in the same note that the other movies do, that where he's old. Where like, of course, maybe he's too old to, start anew romantically with somebody else. A lot of, modern adaptations like to make him young, and what they do, and I think this is, a decent choice, is that they give him the chance to rebuild with his ex-fiance. It's maybe idealistic, but it works. Here, they decide to give him a secondary love interest because, again, he's young. Why wouldn't he have a second chance at love? But it just feels, again, very mean-spirited. And also his ex-girlfriend, his ex-fiance's name is Nell. So I guess they wanted to be like a clever, Charles Dickens nod, Little Nell and her dying and all that. It just doesn't work for the story, and I find it just, the inclusion very strange, and I don't know, it's one big flub of this movie, because everything else, all the other weirdness, all the other character shifts, they don't really rock the boat that much. And this change, I think, could have been really interesting, but it just feels like a perfunctory conglomeration rather than coming from something very inventive or very creative, Other than that, I do like it. I don't think I'll rewatch this one anytime soon, other than to catch things I didn't catch the first time. And Stuart Brennan's performance, I don't want to say it was bad, but I do think that he has a lot more potential than what's on screen here. And I love how goofy he tries to be. I think this is probably the goofiest Scrooge, when he tries to pull that end of story prank on Bob Cratchit and his family. I did get a laugh at that because he is such a Gomer in that scene, and that's probably one of the few things that I think is very positively different, like that stands out very much as a highlight. Overall, it's middling, it's mediocre. I didn't get that much entertainment out of it, but it's not terrible. It's definitely not unwatchable, and it is definitely memorable for some of the oddities. Overall, 6 out of 10. And yeah, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think below. Leave a like, comment, subscribe if you've seen this one. And yeah, share your thoughts. Have a great second day of Christmas.